Daniel Reeves had never flown coach. Not once. In the 15 years he'd spent climbing the corporate ladder in the airline industry, he'd always been whisked through security in a private lane, handed a warm towel before takeoff, and greeted by name the moment he stepped on board. But today was different. Today he stood in the back of a slow-moving line at gate B12, clutching a worn backpack and trying not to look like someone who once had a private jet on standby. He'd taken the job as CEO of Horizon Skies 3 months ago, inheriting an airline that was bleeding customers and morale. The numbers didn't lie. On-time performance was slipping, complaints were up, and employee turnover had hit a 5-year high. The board wanted quick fixes, but Daniel knew real change didn't come from spreadsheets. It came from seeing things with your own eyes. So he made a decision that felt equal parts reckless and necessary. He'd fly as a regular passenger on one of his own flights, completely undercover. He'd spent days preparing, not with disguises or fake mustaches, just by stripping away everything that screamed executive. He traded his tailored navy blazer for a faded gray hoodie, swapped his leather loafers for scuffed sneakers, and left his phone in his office, carrying only a cheap burner and a small notebook. He booked a one-way ticket from Chicago to Denver in economy under the name D. Carter, using a corporate credit card that wouldn't trace back to him. No upgrades, no special treatment, just a middle seat in row 23 wedged between a window sleeper and an armrest hog. The morning of the flight, he woke up early, not from nerves, but from a strange sense of clarity. He wasn't doing this for optics or a feel-good press release. He genuinely didn't know what his airline felt like to the people who used it every day. And if he was honest with himself, he wasn't sure he wanted to find out. At the airport, the first red flag came before he even reached security. The self-check-in kiosks were jammed, half of them flashing error messages, the other half surrounded by frustrated travelers trying to reroute their luggage after a sudden gate change. A lone Horizon Skies agent stood near the entrance, arms crossed, answering questions with clipped robotic replies. When Daniel asked if his bag would make the connection in Denver, the agent barely looked up. "If it's tagged right, it'll get there," he said, already turning to the next person. Inside the terminal, the air smelled faintly of stale coffee and disinfectant. Overhead screens flickered with delays. A mother tried to calm her crying toddler while balancing a stroller and 2 carry-ons. No one offered help. Daniel watched as a man in a Horizon Skies uniform walked past her without breaking stride. Boarding began 20 minutes late. The gate agent called zones in a monotone voice, barely making eye contact. When Daniel's group was finally called, he shuffled forward with the crowd, feeling the weight of his own anonymity. No one recognized him. Not the gate agent, not the ramp worker scanning tickets, not even the flight attendant standing at the aircraft door with a tired smile that didn't reach her eyes. Stepping into the cabin felt like entering a different world, one he'd helped design but had never truly experienced. The overhead bins were already overflowing. The carpet, once a crisp navy in promotional photos, was frayed near the aisles. The air had that recycled, slightly metallic smell common to older planes. He found his seat, 23B, and squeezed in, his knees pressing against the seat back in front. The tray table wobbled when he tried to lower it. The seat cushion had a thin spot right in the middle. He glanced around. Most passengers were already plugged into headphones or staring blankly at their phones. A few looked stressed, checking watches or muttering about connections. No one was smiling, not even the kids. Within minutes, the flight attendants began their pre-flight routine. Their movements were efficient but joyless. One of them, a woman with short graying hair and a name tag that read Linda, walked down the aisle reciting safety instructions like she'd done it 1,000 times before. Her voice carried no warmth, just obligation. When she reached Daniel's row, she paused just long enough to verify seatbelts were fastened, then moved on without a word. A few minutes later, another crew member came through with drink orders. Daniel asked for water. The attendant, a younger man with dark circles under his eyes, handed him a small plastic cup without making eye contact. "That's all we've got for now," he said flatly. "Ice machine's broken again." Daniel nodded, but inside, A knot tightened in his stomach. This wasn't just about a broken ice machine. It was the tone, the exhaustion, the quiet resignation in every interaction. These weren't bad people. He could see that. They were good people stretched too thin, working in a system that gave them no room to breathe. As the plane taxied toward the runway, he pulled out his notebook and scribbled 2 words: no pride. That's what struck him most. There was no sense of ownership, no spark of care in how things were being run. It was as if everyone, staff and passengers alike, had accepted that this was just how flying had to be: uncomfortable, impersonal, and slightly degrading. He thought back to his first week as CEO. He'd stood in front of the leadership team and talked about rebuilding trust and putting people first. At the time, it felt like the right thing to say. Now, sitting in a cramped middle seat with a wobbly tray table and lukewarm water, those words sounded hollow. How could he talk about trust when his own employees clearly didn't believe the company cared about them? And if they didn't feel valued, how could they possibly make passengers feel welcome? The plane lifted off, and Chicago shrank beneath them. Daniel stared out the window, not at the clouds, but at his own reflection in the glass. For the first time in years, he felt like an outsider in his own company. And worse, he realized he'd helped build the walls that kept him out. He hadn't expected to feel regret this quickly. He'd thought he'd have time to observe, to gather data, to stay detached. But within an hour of stepping into the terminal, he already knew the truth. Horizon Skies wasn't broken because of lazy workers or difficult customers. It was broken because the people at the top, including him, had stopped listening. And now trapped in seat 23B at 35,000 feet, with no way to fix it until the wheels touched down, all he could do was watch, listen, and hope he hadn't waited too long to see what was right in front of him. The flight leveled off, and the seatbelt sign clicked off with a tired chime. Around Daniel, passengers shifted, stretched, and reached for overhead bins. A baby started fussing a few rows back. Someone unwrapped a crinkly snack bag. Normal sounds, normal movements, but everything felt heavier now, seen through new eyes. He tried to focus on his notebook, but his attention kept drifting to the cabin crew. They moved like people going through motions they'd long stopped believing in. No smiles, no eye contact, just efficiency stripped of humanity. One attendant pushed the drink cart down the aisle with the energy of someone dragging a sack of bricks. When a passenger asked for a second soda, she sighed, just barely, but Daniel heard it and said, "We're not a buffet, sir." He watched as she handed out tiny cups of juice to a family with young kids. The youngest reached for the cup with both hands, spilling a little on his shirt. The attendant didn't flinch, didn't say, "It's okay," just moved on. Daniel's stomach twisted. This wasn't just poor service, it was emotional exhaustion, and he knew deep down that policies he'd approved were part of the reason. Reduced turnaround times between flights, cuts to onboard supplies to optimize costs, mandatory overtime during staffing shortages, all of it done in the name of efficiency, all of it invisible from a corner office. He decided to test the waters. When the cart came near his row again, he leaned forward slightly. "Excuse me," he said, keeping his voice calm and polite. "Is there any chance I could get a napkin? My cup's a little wet on the bottom." The attendant, a woman in her late 40s with tired eyes and a Horizon Skies scarf tied too tightly around her neck, glanced at him like he'd asked for a personal favor. "Napkins are behind you," she said, nodding toward the galley. "Help yourself." "But I'm in a middle seat," he said gently. "Kind of hard to get past without bothering both neighbors." She paused, then reached under the cart and tossed a single folded napkin onto his tray. It landed with a soft thud. "There," she said. "Happy?" He nodded, not wanting to escalate anything. "Thanks." A few minutes later, the man in the window seat next to him, a quiet guy in a flannel shirt who'd barely spoken, leaned over. "Don't take it personal," he murmured. "They've been like this all month. Last time I flew this route, one of them snapped at a grandma for asking where the bathroom was." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Really?" "Yeah," said. "It hasn't moved since last week." The man shook his head. "Used to love this airline. Now I only fly them when I have no choice. That stung more than the napkin comment, because it wasn't anger. It was resignation, the kind of disappointment that doesn't yell, but quietly walks away forever. Then came the moment Daniel hadn't seen coming. A passenger a few rows ahead, a woman traveling alone, mid-50s, clutching a small carry-on like it held something precious, stood up during the drink service and asked if she could switch seats. She'd been assigned a middle, but the person next to her had fallen asleep sprawled across the armrest and she couldn't get comfortable. "I just need a window if there's one free," she said, voice soft but hopeful. The lead flight attendant, Linda, the one from boarding, walked over. She didn't check the manifest, didn't glance at empty seats, just crossed her arms. "Ma'am, we don't do seat changes after boarding. You picked your seat when you checked in." "But I didn't pick middle," the woman said. "It was assigned at the gate." "Then you should have spoken up then." Linda's tone was final. "Sit down, please. You're blocking the aisle." The woman hesitated, cheeks flushing. She looked around as if hoping someone would back her up. No one did. Slowly, she sat back down, eyes fixed on her lap. Daniel watched the whole exchange. His chest felt tight. This wasn't policy enforcement, it was power flexing. And it was happening in his name. He waited until the crew moved to the back of the plane, then quietly stood and walked toward the galley. He kept his posture relaxed, his hands loose at his sides. No threat, just a traveler with a question. "Hey," he said softly to Linda. "I saw what happened back there. Is there really no empty window seat? I'm in 23B. If someone wants my middle, I don't mind switching." Linda turned, eyes narrowing slightly. "You offering to give up your seat?" "Yeah, if it helps." She studied him for a beat, maybe sensing something off about his calmness or maybe just too tired to care. "We don't encourage passengers swapping seats," she said flatly. "It messes with the weight balance." "That's not true on a short domestic flight," Daniel said gently. "And even if it were, one seat change won't tip the plane." Her expression hardened. "Are you questioning my training?" "No," he said quickly. "Just trying to help." "Well, don't." She turned away, busying herself with the cart. "We've got procedures for a reason." He stepped back, hands up slightly. "Okay, sorry." But as he returned to his seat, another crew member, a younger guy with a tight jaw, leaned in as he passed. "You might want to stop asking so many questions," he said under his breath. "Some of us are just trying to get through the day." Daniel sat down, heart pounding. Not from fear, but from shame. Because he knew that trying to get through the day wasn't the crew's fault. It was the result of years of leadership that treated people like cogs. And he'd been part of that machine. The rest of the flight crawled by. The cabin grew stuffy. The air vents above his seat sputtered weakly. A child cried, then stopped when his mom whispered, "Shh, they'll get mad." Daniel heard that. Really heard it. When the drink cart came around again, he didn't ask for anything. Neither did most of the passengers. The silence was louder than complaints. Then, during a patch of mild turbulence, the woman who'd asked for a seat change let out a small gasp. Her knuckles turned white on the armrests. She looked genuinely scared. Instinct kicked in. Daniel reached into his backpack, pulled out a sealed bottle of water he'd brought from the terminal and leaned toward her. "Here," he said quietly. "Sometimes cold water helps." She looked startled, then grateful. "Thank you," she whispered, taking it with trembling hands. Before he could sit back, a sharp voice cut through the cabin. "What do you think you're doing?" It was Linda. She stood a few feet away, arms crossed, face tight. "Just giving her some water," Daniel said, keeping his tone even. "That's not allowed," she said, stepping closer. "Passengers can't distribute outside food or drink. It's a safety and sanitation issue." "It's bottled water," he said. "Unopened. Doesn't matter." Her voice rose slightly. "You're interfering with crew protocol." "Hand it over." The woman tried to give the bottle back, but Linda snatched it from her hand. "And you," she said, turning to the woman, "should know better than to accept things from strangers." The humiliation in the woman's eyes was instant. She looked down, tears welling. Daniel felt something snap inside him, not anger, but clarity. This wasn't about a bottle of water. It was about control. About a system so broken that kindness was seen as a threat. He didn't argue, didn't raise his voice, just sat back and said, "Understood." But as Linda walked away, muttering into her headset. He caught the younger attendant watching him. Not with hostility, but with something like pity. For the rest of the flight, Daniel stayed silent. He watched how the crew avoided eye contact with passengers, how they spoke to each other in hushed, frustrated tones near the galley, how they moved like they were bracing for the next complaint, the next problem, the next impossible demand. And he realized something worse than being mistreated. He was witnessing good people being turned into something they didn't want to be. And the person most responsible for that was him. By the time the captain announced their descent into Denver, Daniel wasn't thinking about customer satisfaction scores or quarterly reports. He was thinking about the woman who just wanted a window seat, the child told to be quiet, the exhausted crew who used to wear their uniforms with pride. He hadn't just regretted his decision to go undercover. He regretted waiting so long to see the truth. The plane touched down in Denver with a soft bump, and the cabin lights flickered on. Passengers stirred, stretching stiff limbs and reaching for bags. Daniel stayed seated, letting others file out first. He needed a moment, not to collect his things, but to collect himself. His hands were steady, but his mind was racing. What had just happened wasn't just bad service. It was a collapse of basic human decency, and it had happened under his watch. He kept replaying the moment the flight attendant snatched that water bottle away. Not because it was dangerous, not because it broke a real rule, but because it gave her a sliver of control in a job that offered her none. And that, more than anything, terrified him. Because if that's what his airline had become, a place where kindness was punished and authority was wielded like a weapon, then no amount of marketing or rebranding would fix it. He walked off the plane last, head down, backpack slung over one shoulder. The jet bridge felt colder than usual, the fluorescent lights too bright. At the bottom of the ramp, a ground agent stood checking boarding passes, barely glancing at faces. Daniel handed over his, and the agent stamped it without a word. No welcome to Denver, no have a good day, just a mechanical flick of the wrist. Outside, the October air was sharp and dry. He stood on the curb for a long minute, watching taxis pull up and families reunite. A Horizon Skies baggage handler wheeled a cart past, shoulders slumped, earpiece dangling. He didn't look up. Didn't seem to notice anything beyond the next bag he had to load. Daniel flagged a cab and gave the driver the address of a quiet hotel near downtown. Not the corporate suite he usually stayed in, but a modest place with brick walls and creaky floors. He checked in under the same fake name, paid in cash, and took the stairs to the third floor. In his room, he dropped his backpack on the bed and sat on the edge, staring at the wall. He pulled out his notebook, flipped to the first page. No pride, he'd written. Now he added no trust, no care. Just survival. He wasn't angry at the crew. Not really. He'd seen enough in those 2 hours to understand. They weren't cruel. They were worn down, overworked, under-supported, and stuck in a system that measured their worth by how fast they could turn a plane around, not how they made people feel. And who built that system? People like him. Executives who talked about efficiency while cutting rest breaks, slashing training budgets, and ignoring the slow erosion of morale. He thought about the woman with the water bottle, the way her face had crumpled when she was scolded like a child. He thought about the flight attendant's eyes, tired, yes, but also defensive, like she expected to be blamed no matter what she did. Everyone on that plane was trapped, passengers in discomfort, crew in resentment, and him in the illusion that he was in control. His phone buzzed in his pocket, the real one. The one he'd left in his office but retrieved before leaving Chicago. A message from his assistant. Board meeting moved to Friday. They want an update on customer experience initiatives. He almost laughed. What could he possibly tell them? I flew coach and got treated like a nuisance? Our people are one bad day away from quitting. We've built an airline that feels like a punishment? No, he couldn't say any of that, not yet. Because if he did, they'd want solutions. And right now, he didn't have any. Only questions. He spent the evening walking. Not sightseeing, just moving. He passed diners where airline crews gathered after shifts, still in uniform, eating in silence. He saw a Horizon Skies pilot sitting alone at a bar, staring into a glass of water, not drinking it, just sitting. Daniel didn't approach. He didn't need to. He knew that look. It was the look of someone who used to love their job but now just endures it. Back at the hotel, He called the airline's internal hotline, the one employees were supposed to use to report concerns anonymously. He listened to the automated menu, then hung up. He already knew what they'd say. Your call is important to us. But was it really? Or was it just another box to check? The next morning, he woke early and went to the airport again. Not to fly, but to watch. He sat in a corner near a Horizon Skies gate, sipping bad coffee from a paper cup, observing. A gate agent argued with a passenger over a carry-on size. A ramp worker kicked a luggage cart in frustration. A flight attendant stood by the jet bridge, arms crossed, checking her watch like she was counting down the minutes until she could leave. And then he saw her, Linda, the lead attendant from his flight. She was in fresh uniform, hair neatly pinned, but her posture was the same, rigid, closed off. She spoke to a new crew with clipped instructions, no warmth, no encouragement. But as she turned away, Daniel caught something. A flicker of exhaustion so deep it looked like grief. That's when it hit him. This wasn't just about fixing service. It was about restoring dignity to the people who worked for him and to the people who trusted him with their travel. And you couldn't do that with memos or mandates. You had to show up. Really show up. He didn't go back to Chicago that day. Instead, he booked a seat on another Horizon Skies flight, this time to Phoenix. Same disguise, same backpack, same middle seat. He needed to know if what he'd seen was an outlier or the norm. This flight was worse, the plane was older, the seats more worn. One overhead bin wouldn't close, so bags were stacked in the aisle. The drink cart ran out of coffee before it reached the back. And the crew? They moved like ghosts. No announcements beyond the bare minimum. No offers to help. When a passenger asked about a delay, the response was, "Not our fault. Talk to operations." Halfway through the flight, turbulence hit, harder this time. The plane dropped suddenly and a woman near the front let out a cry. She gripped her armrests, breathing fast, eyes wide with panic. No one went to her. Not at first. Daniel didn't hesitate. He unbuckled, walked forward slowly, hands visible, voice calm, and knelt beside her. "Hey," he said softly. "You're okay. It's just rough air. It'll pass." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "I hate flying," she whispered. "I know," he said. "But you're safe. The pilots know what they're doing." Before he could say more, a voice cut in, sharp, loud. "Sir, you need to return to your seat immediately." It was the lead attendant. She stood a few feet away, face tight, finger pointed. "I'm just helping," Daniel said, still calm. "That's not your job," she snapped. "That's ours. And you're violating safety protocol by being out of your seat during turbulence." "The seatbelt sign just went off," he said, glancing at the panel above. "It doesn't matter. Sit down now." He did. But as he walked back, he heard her mutter to another crew member, "Amateurs. Think they can play hero." Back in his seat, heart pounding, he realized something chilling. She wasn't angry because he broke a rule. She was angry because he reminded her that she hadn't helped. And that reminder hurt more than any passenger complaint ever could. That night, in a different hotel in Phoenix, Daniel didn't write in his notebook. He just stared at the ceiling. He wasn't just witnessing a broken system anymore. He was feeling its weight in his bones. And for the first time since taking the CEO job, he understood. You can't lead people you don't see. And he hadn't seen them, not really until now, but seeing wasn't enough. He had to act, and soon. Because every day he waited, another passenger walked away. Another crew member lost a piece of themselves. And the airline he was supposed to save was slipping further into a cycle of indifference. He picked up his phone, dialed a number he hadn't used in years, the head of operations, a gruff veteran who'd been with Horizon Skies since the 90s. "I need you to pull crew schedules for the next week," Daniel said, voice low. "And find me every employee who worked flights 287 and 412. A pause. "Why?" "Because I owe them a conversation," he said. "Not as their CEO, as someone who finally gets it." He hung up, walked to the window, looked out at the city lights. Tomorrow he'd go home, and the real work would begin. Not with speeches, but with listening. Because the truth wasn't in the boardroom. It was in the middle seat, in the galley, in the quiet moments no report could capture, and he was done ignoring it. Back in Chicago, the headquarters of Horizon Skies loomed like a glass and steel monument to order and control. Sleek hallways, hushed conference rooms, framed mission statements on every wall. "We fly with heart. Your journey, our promise. Daniel used to believe those words. Now they felt like echoes in an empty room. He hadn't slept much since returning, not because he was anxious, though he was, but because every time he closed his eyes, he saw faces, the woman clutching her water bottle, the flight attendant with the 1,000-yard stare, the ground crew moving like shadows at dawn. He couldn't unsee what he'd witnessed, and he knew if he didn't act fast, the moment would pass, buried under budget reviews and strategy decks. He called an all-hands meeting, not with executives, but with the people who'd been on those 2 flights. Gate agents, ramp workers, flight attendants, even the onboard chef from the Phoenix route. He didn't tell them why they were summoned. Just that it was mandatory and confidential, and that he'd be there himself. No assistants, no PR team, no safety net. The morning of the meeting, he arrived early. Not through the executive entrance, but through the employee side, past the break room where coffee pots sat half empty and lockers were labeled with peeling tape. He wore the same gray hoodie from his undercover flights, jeans and the scuffed sneakers. No tie, no badge, just a man who looked like he belonged nowhere and everywhere at once. When the crew filed into the small training room on the 3rd floor, confusion rippled through the group. Some recognized him instantly and stiffened. Others squinted, unsure. A few exchanged nervous glances. They'd expected a reprimand, a lecture, maybe even terminations. After all, someone had reported a passenger interfering with crew duties on both flights. They assumed it was about that. Daniel stood at the front, hands in his pockets. No podium, no slides. Just him and a circle of chairs. "I'm not here to punish anyone," he said, voice quiet but clear. "I'm here because I owe you an apology." Oh no. Thick, heavy silence. He took a breath. 2 weeks ago, I flew coach on Flight 287 from Chicago to Denver. Then again on Flight 412 to Phoenix. I didn't tell anyone who I was. I wanted to see what it's really like to fly with us, not as a CEO but as a passenger. And what I saw broke my heart. A few people shifted. One woman crossed her arms. Another looked down at her shoes. I saw good people, skilled, experienced, caring people, working in a system that makes it nearly impossible to do your jobs well. He continued. I saw you stretched thin, spoken to like numbers, not humans. I saw you snap, not because you're unkind, but because you're exhausted. And I saw passengers treated like problems instead of people. He paused. Let it sink in. Worst of all, he said, voice dropping, I realized I helped build that system. The cuts, the schedules, the pressure to optimize everything, even your dignity. I thought I was making the airline stronger, but all I did was make it colder. No one spoke, but the tension in the room shifted, just slightly. From fear to something else. Maybe curiosity, maybe hope, then from the back, a voice. So, you're the guy who gave that woman water. It was Linda. She stood near the door, arms still crossed, but her eyes were locked on his. Daniel nodded.
I am. She didn't smile.
But she didn't look away either. We got written up for that, she said flatly. Said we failed to maintain control of the cabin. He winced. That shouldn't have happened. And it won't happen again. How do we know? Another attendant asked, younger, voice edged with skepticism. Last year they promised better rest breaks, then canceled them 2 months later due to operational needs. You don't, Daniel admitted. Not yet. But I'm asking you to give me a chance to prove it. Not with promises. With action. He walked to the whiteboard and picked up a marker. Tell me what you need. Not what you think I want to hear. What you actually need to feel respected, supported, and able to do your jobs without burning out. At first, no one spoke. Then slowly hands rose. Real breaks, someone said. Not 10 minutes between flights while we're still cleaning the cabin. Stop cutting supply budgets, another added. We run out of blankets, snacks, even trash bags. Then passengers get mad at us. We need backup when flights are delayed, said a gate agent. Right now it's one person handling 200 angry travelers. No wonder we sound short. One by one they spoke. Not shouting. Not blaming. Just naming the daily realities they'd stopped complaining about because no one ever listened. Daniel wrote every word down. No filtering. No justifications. Just listened. Then Linda spoke again, quieter this time. You know what hurts most? When passengers look at us like we're the enemy. But we didn't raise ticket prices. We didn't cancel their flights. We're just trying to get through the day without getting yelled at or written up. Daniel met her gaze. Then let's change that. Together. He didn't offer grand solutions that day. No magic fixes. But he made 3 promises. First, rest periods between flights would be extended immediately. No exceptions. Second, every frontline employee would get a direct line to his office, anonymous if they chose, with a guarantee of response within 48 hours. Third, he would fly coach once a month openly as himself, and spend the flight listening, not inspecting. After the meeting, people lingered. Some thanked him. Others just nodded, still wary. But as they filed out, something had shifted. Not everything was fixed, but for the first time in years, someone at the top had looked them in the eye and said, "This isn't your fault." Later that afternoon, Daniel walked through the terminal, not as CEO, but as a visitor. He stopped by the Horizon Skies gate and watched the crew prepare for departure. The same gate agent from his first flight was there, but this time she smiled at a family with small kids, helped them with their stroller, and double-checked their boarding passes with patience. He didn't interrupt, just watched. On his way out, he passed a maintenance worker tightening a bolt on a jet bridge. The man looked up, saw him, and gave a small nod. Daniel nodded back, no words. But understanding passed between them. That night, he sent an email to the entire company. Not a polished corporate statement, but a raw, honest note titled simply, "What I Learned in Seat 23B. He didn't hide his identity, didn't spin the story, just told the truth. He'd gone undercover, been treated poorly, and realized the real problem wasn't the people on the front lines. It was the leadership that forgot to care. The response was immediate. Hundreds of replies poured in, from pilots, baggage handlers, call center staff. Some thanked him. Some challenged him. All of them said the same thing. Finally, someone sees us. Daniel knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Culture doesn't change overnight. Trust takes time to rebuild. But for the first time since taking the job, he felt like he was leading something real. Not a brand, not a balance sheet, but a group of people who deserved better. And he was ready to fight for them. Not from a corner office, but from the middle seat, right where he belonged. 3 months passed. Winter settled over the Midwest, and Horizon Skies began to feel different. Not in a flashy overnight way, but in the quiet shifts that only real people notice. The kind of changes that don't show up in press releases but show up in how someone hands you a coffee cup or says your boarding group. Daniel kept his promises. Every month he booked a coach seat on a random domestic route. No advance notice, no special treatment. Sometimes passengers recognized him and asked for selfies. Other times he flew unnoticed, just another traveler with a backpack and a window seat. But he always listened, always watched, and always took notes, not for reports, but for reminders. The first real sign that things were changing came from the crew. Rest breaks were honored now. Not perfectly. There were still delays and last-minute schedule shuffles, but when a flight attendant asked for a full 30 minutes between turns, she got it. No questions, no side-eye. That small act of respect rippled outward. People started smiling again. Not the forced, have a nice flight kind, but real ones. Warm, tired, human. Onboard supplies improved too. Blankets were restocked. Snack bins stayed full. The ice machine in the galley fixed within a week of the first employee complaint through the new feedback line. It wasn't about luxury, it was about dignity. When crews weren't scrambling for basics, they could focus on people. Passengers noticed. Not all at once, but gradually. A woman traveling alone said a flight attendant checked on her during turbulence, not because she asked, but because she looked nervous. A father thanked a gate agent who helped his son find a lost stuffed animal before boarding. These weren't scripted moments. They were choices made possible, because the people making them finally felt like they had room to breathe. Then came the email that changed everything. It was from the woman who'd been scolded for accepting the water bottle. She didn't know Daniel's name then, but after his company-wide note went out, she connected the dots. Her message was short, just 3 paragraphs. She wrote that she'd almost stopped flying Horizon Skies forever after that flight, but something made her give it one more try. And on her next trip, the crew had been kind, patient, even thoughtful. It felt like the airline remembered it's made of people, she wrote. Not just seats and schedules. Daniel read it twice, then printed it and pinned it to the wall in his office, right next to the mission statement that once felt hollow. Behind the scenes, bigger changes took root. Training sessions were redesigned, not as compliance drills but as conversations about empathy, stress, and real-world problem-solving. Supervisors were taught to listen before they corrected, and for the first time, frontline staff were invited to help shape new policies. One flight attendant even co-led a workshop on passenger communication. "We're the ones hearing the complaints," she told the room. "Let us help fix the causes, not just clean up the mess." Morale didn't skyrocket overnight, but turnover slowed. Sick calls dropped. And in the employee survey that quarter, the question, "Do you feel respected at work?" saw its highest score in 7 years. Still, Daniel knew trust was fragile, so he kept showing up not as a savior but as a partner. He ate in the crew lounge during layovers, sat with baggage handlers during shift changes, asked questions, and more importantly, waited for the answers. One afternoon in Denver, he boarded a flight back to Chicago and found Linda working the same route again. She saw him pause, then gave a small nod. No tension. No defensiveness. Just acknowledgement. Halfway through the flight, she walked past his seat and handed him a full bottle of water. Unopened, chilled. "Company policy now," she said, almost smiling. "We encourage hydration," he thanked her. Didn't make a scene. Just tucked it into his bag. Later, as the plane descended, she stopped by again. "You know," she said quietly, "I used to love this job. Then I forgot why. Lately, I'm starting to remember." That meant more to him than any quarterly profit report. News of the CEO's undercover flights eventually leaked, not through a press release but through word of mouth. A passenger posted about seeing him in coach. A crew member mentioned it to a friend. Soon, it became part of the airline's quiet legend, not as a stunt but as a turning point. People didn't talk about it like a marketing trick. They talked about it like a wake-up call, one that finally led to change. Horizon skies didn't become perfect. Flights still got delayed, systems still glitched. But the tone shifted. When things went wrong, the response wasn't blame, it was, "How can we fix this together?" Passengers noticed the difference. So did employees. And slowly, customer satisfaction scores began to climb. Not because of gimmicks, but because people felt seen. Daniel never repeated the undercover experiment. He didn't need to. He'd learned the most important lesson. Leadership isn't about hiding to observe. It's about showing up to listen. One evening, months later, he stood at a gate in Chicago watching his airline prepare for a late-night departure. A young flight attendant helped an elderly passenger with her carry-on. A ramp worker waved to a pilot like they were old friends. The intercom announced boarding with calm clarity, not robotic urgency. He didn't feel pride, not the kind that swells the chest. He felt something quieter, deeper, responsibility, and gratitude, because real change hadn't come from a memo or a mandate. It came from ordinary people deciding day after day to treat each other like humans again, and all it took was someone at the top finally having the courage to sit in the middle seat and see the truth. As he walked away from the gate, a passenger brushed past him, muttering about a delay. But then the gate agent called out, "We've got extra snacks and charging stations open. Come on over if you need a break." The passenger paused, nodded, and walked toward the counter. Daniel smiled to himself. No grand speeches, no headlines, just a small act of care, offered without being asked. And in that moment he knew Horizon Skies wasn't just flying again. It was healing.